Awesome. I'm so excited to be here with Rose Parma, discussing breaking through the chains and bondage of abuse. She is with Barn of Grace Ministries and the founder of She Becomes Unshakable. So let's welcome Rose Parma. Yay!
Thank
So
you.
excited.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So can you share a little bit about what happened in your story from the beginning? Just share a little bit with us.
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm actually a survivor of abuse, of attempted murder from my ex-husband. And I say that kind of just lightly going out there, but there's so much entangled in that, especially when we're talking about chains of bondage, right? Of abuse. So at the age of 15, it started with being groomed by this man who was 11 years older than me. He was a friend of the family and spent a lot of time, hanging out with the family. Little by little, I noticed now looking back in hindsight that I had been groomed all that time along, but it came to the point where he presented to me that he was in love with me, quote unquote, and thought that it would be a great idea for us to be together. P.S. I was, a young girl at 15 years old, and there's this man who was so much older than me. Fast forward, I ended up pregnant. At some point, we ended up just talking about marriage. I got married to him, didn't realize at that point in my life that I was really going down this massive destructive road. I really wanted to believe in that dream of like marriage and love. And he really loved me and was going to care for me. And it turned out that he actually had a huge, large criminal background, was heavily involved in drugs, things that I was totally oblivious to. And he ended up in jail because of the fact that my mom pressed charges for him being older than me. He got out, and shortly after that, I started to notice a lot of controlling behaviors. He would control everything I did, would look at everything I did, every phone call, every email, every social media post. Back then, it was MySpace. Every action that I took, I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells, didn't really know what controlling behaviors were. Again, I was still kind of like growing up in that state. And then I started to notice like anger, rage kind of coming out of him. He never was abusive to me. And then there came the day when I started to really open my eyes and get sick of being controlled and started to recognize that I was being controlled and manipulated. We had already had 2 kids at this point, and the time I tried to leave, he was constantly accusing me of doing things behind his back. And there was something just really like ridiculous that he was accusing me of. And I just decided that's it. That's the last straw. Like, I need to get out of this before it gets worse. And in that moment, he flipped on me, and it ended up resulting in him taking my head, slamming it against the concrete. I was going in and out of consciousness. He told me that I could not leave. I was not getting away. He slit my neck with a knife. He held it to my neck, and basically was beating me, broke all my ribs. And I just remember going in and out of consciousness, just thinking like, screaming for help to try to get someone to hear me. My kids were there. They didn't see it until they came out of the room. And my son at the time he was little, like 3 or 4 years old. He got this rainmaker stick, like one of those, like wood rainmaker sticks.
Mhm.
And he started beating him, trying to get him off of me. And it was like, I could literally see the demonic just look on his face, on my ex's face, as he was doing this to me. And it's like he snapped out of it and backed up off of me. And my daughter was just screaming because I didn't realize I was bleeding so bad, but I was literally in a puddle of blood. So, getting through all that, I eventually got help. Was able to escape, and just fast forwarding from there, being in the hospital bed that night, I just remember pleading to God that if he would spare my life, if he would allow me to make it through to live. I get so emotional every time I tell this story, but I remember asking God if he would spare my life, that I would dedicate my life to helping women get out of situations like this, and to recognize what grooming even is, and to recognize that even emotional abuse, right, can lead to physical abuse, and any form of abuse is not healthy at all. And I asked the Lord that if he would spare my life. I literally was petitioning him to spare my life so I can raise my babies and be there for them. And God did. He did. He spared my life, and I kept my promise to him. Years went by, and it was years of healing. I mean, years, and we can go a little bit into that, but it was years of healing. And here I am today. What I had been through, that destruction, right? That complete devastation of my life and chaotic season of my life for years, actually, that I had went through. God is using it and allowing me to I launched a ministry that is nationwide, Barna Grace Ministries, that specifically is dedicated to helping survivors of abuse and human sex trafficking.
You are amazing. And I think I had some tears in that one. Can you help us understand, or help our audience understand, what grooming is and what signs to look for and what that looks like?
Yeah. Well, now that I've been working in this ministry for quite some time and worked with a lot of different survivors from all sorts of paths, one of the things I can say that is very common is that it's usually grooming from an older man to a younger girl. This can happen with both sexes, to be honest, but I'm seeing it because I'm in women's ministry. This is what I see it in the most. It's a lot of like, I just sharing affection and love, what is quote unquote affection and love, and gifting many gifts, and having just kind of like pouring extra in relationship that just really doesn't make sense, right? And noticing that big long extended age gap is something that is very common across the board. It also results in, when you can tie that into like controlling behaviors, such as always checking your phone, always checking your emails, asking who is that, what are you doing, where are you going, just feeling like someone is constantly hovering over you. Those are common things that we see a lot in grooming. One thing that I really was shocking to me, the further I have been getting into ministry, is that a lot of survivors of abuse and human sex trafficking, especially sex trafficking, don't even realize that they're being groomed. Drugs are often involved, and alcohol use is often involved. Now, for my case, I don't ever recall being drugged up or drinking. Okay. I don't recall that being ever a part of my journey. But now that I look back, I kind of wonder if I ever was like snuck in a drug, like as in a drink or something, because I recall certain things that happened where there were a lot of like people that I didn't recognize that were around, just weird scenarios that I would find myself in as I look back. And I'm just wondering if it's happened to all these other women that we're working with that are survivors of trafficking. It very well could have happened to me, and I never would have known. You know what I mean? Because when you're drugged up, you don't recognize that that's what's happening.
Oh my goodness. I've never thought about it that way. I'm a little bit on the speechless side with that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know I've heard stories of that, and I know that they do drug people. So I guess that would be a pretty common thing. And then the women wouldn't know that that's something that is happening, because you don't know if it's dropped in your drink or something.
Right. It's kind of scary, just, and I'm telling you, the more survivors that we work with, the more that I correlate my story to what many survivors have shared. And oftentimes our freedom advocates that we work with, which are the women that work directly, once the survivor from sex trafficking is rescued, they are partnered with a freedom advocate until they find placement in a safe house for them. And so oftentimes when I work with the freedom advocates, they will share stories, and they know my story very well. And they will share things with me, and they're like, your story is very similar to the girl that we just rescued. And it just is opening my eyes to see from a whole different lens. What I was going through was a lot more serious than I even anticipated. Yes, it ended in massive physical abuse, but there was so much more that led up to that I didn't even recognize was there while I was in it. And this is something that's a common thread with any form of abuse. We hear a lot of times we justify the abuser's behavior, that, oh, they just really care about me. They really love me. They're just doing that out of concern, kind of thing.
So did you, looking back, was that the only time he physically abused you? Was that one time? That was it? And you probably would have never thought that he would be that person to abuse you to that level?
Yeah, it started with like punching holes in the wall and yelling and slamming doors and busting doors, things like that, but never to me, never to my kids. And again, looking back, like I should have left, you think like I should have left sooner. I should have gotten out sooner. But in my mind, I was really believing, because I had been groomed for so long, I was really believing like, he really does love me. He really does care. He's just getting angry because he really does care. It may seem silly to hear, but when you're in it, it just seems like your justifications for this behavior are normal and real.
I think that's a common factor with abuse, is that it's their normal and they don't see that there's anything wrong with it. So, I mean, I grew up in an abusive home and I saw a lot of abuse, and I can understand my mom not realizing how abusive it was, or the things that she went through as well. And so I understand that you don't see it while you're in it, but then looking back, you have all these realizations, and that's another way the enemy works too, right? Is the guilt, shame, condemnation of I should have. In all reality, that's not the situation. And you don't know what you don't know. But luckily you got out, right? Praise God that you were able to get out, and God spared your life. So can you tell me a little bit about your healing journey? And obviously God spared your life, and you were in the hospital, but what did it look like? What steps did you take? So if you were giving advice or words of wisdom to another survivor or somebody that's in the situation, what does that healing journey look like?
Yeah, so I think the biggest portion of the healing was just accepting that this is my life now, right? Because here I am, I'm in the hospital bed, and it's like we had a house together, we had the boat together, the jet ski, the nice car, nice jobs, all those things together. We had built this family together, right? And it's all I ever knew, because I had went from like a kid to an instant woman, and building this family. And it was just like, okay, I've got to realize and acknowledge that this is really my life now. And the more that I started to wrap my mind around it, the more I started to press into my faith. Now, I'm not going to say that I was 100% like, sold out on my faith, because there were many times when it was like a high and a low, where I was like, why, God, why is this happening to me? Why is my life destruction? And then it would be like this high where my faith was unshakable and I was just completely sold out for Jesus, and it would just kind of be like this for quite some time. But the thing that was constant was I had women that were warring for me behind the scenes. And one in particular, who was my aunt, who, it's beautiful how God made this work out, right? Full circle moment. She's actually I mean, my kids and I were instantly homeless. Okay. And we had went from all of this stuff to just this couple bags of clothes, a mattress, and nowhere to go. Okay. That hurts to say that, but it is what it is,
You
and
got out with
so
your lives. So that's the glory of it, right?
right. And so we ended up at my aunt's house and we were renting a room from her house, which was glorious because here's what happened. She's the woman who introduced me to God when I was a little girl. And so God brought me back to her and she taught me how to pray in authority. And she taught me the meaning of what it really looks like to be a daughter of the mighty King and how to operate in that and how to enter the throne room of heaven in my prayers and how to pray over my children. And so that was a huge part of the healing journey. Then it resulted in, okay, all these triggers would come up, the things that were spoken over me from my ex that were negative as he was grooming me. You're never going to be good enough. No one's going to love you enough. All those things would come up on repeat in my head. And so I had to break those curses off of me, right? So that was another huge part of the healing. And then it was just a constant like forgiveness, personal forgiveness, that why didn't I get out sooner? Why didn't I see this coming? Why didn't I listen to my mom when she told me, like, why didn't I? And just going down that whole surrender of, I need to forgive myself. And that's what led to this entire journey of me, healing through it and giving myself grace in the healing process. It was a whole like 7 years of extended healing for me. Not that saying that that's going to take that long for everyone else, but for me, it did. And I had to be gracious to myself, and really ask God for his grace to fall upon me in that process. But see, fast forward, it's what led me to being a life coach to work with these women. And it's also led me to launching this ministry as a pastor today.
That's amazing. Thank you. So as we wrap up, if you could leave one piece of advice for the next woman to be inspired, what would it look like?
Definitely to give yourself grace. If you find yourself in a situation where you're looking back thinking, I should have done this, I should have done that, just really leaning on Ephesians 1:17, which talks about building a relationship with Christ and diving in to having that relationship so solid so we can get to know him intimately, and praying and asking for wisdom and revelation. Because at the end of the day, right, he's worthy of it all, right? And he will get us through it all. And we just need to give ourselves grace in the process and allow ourselves time to heal.
That's awesome. So how does one give themselves grace and forgive themselves? Just feel prompted to ask that, because I think a lot of women live in that turmoil of all the things that they didn't do or should have done. Or so how do you get to that place? What does that look like?
For me personally, it was more of like acknowledging that I'm human, right? And remembering, like, no matter how many kids I have, like I have a lot of kids, I have 7 kids and run a business and a ministry. And like, no matter how busy I am and how many hats I think I can juggle, at the end of the day, I'm still a human. And at the end of the day, like, I'm not perfect, right? The only perfect one is our Heavenly Father. And knowing that in my weakness, I can literally rely on his strength. And that is just, it's a space of humility, really, is what it is. Just allowing myself to humble myself so that I can lean more on his strength. And that to me is how we can really get into grace, diving into his word, just full out surrender prayers, like talking to our Heavenly Father like he is our very best friend, or even looking at it as if he is our father and we're going to him, just asking for his wisdom, asking for his revelation.
Oh, I love that. I talk to God all the time. I even ask for a favor in parking. So we have this deal about parking. It's a whole nother
There you
story,
go.
but I do. I talk to him all the time about everything. So talking to God about just being your best friend. I love that, because I don't hear very many people say that. So thank you for sharing that. Well, Rose, thank you for your time today. You're with Garden of Grace Ministries, and you have an awesome academy. She coaches me, and She Becomes Unshakable Academy. And so I've had leaps and bounds of growth in the last several months with her coaching. And so thank you so much, Rose, for being with us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm so honored to just be a part of what you're doing, because you are making waves of a difference, girl.
Yay, thank you.